Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our design debate. We're very lucky to have with us today interior designer, furniture designer, motorcycle rider, Simon Cavelle, Lee Penson from the Penson Group, and Nick Sunderland, very well-known interior designer and great friend of Jab. So welcome, and I'll pass you over to Simon to start.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Mike. Thanks. I thought we'd just start as a gentle kind of intro to the discussion and the chat, just to see where we started off and what made you choose the career path that you chose. And well, over to you.
Well, I suppose it was always going to happen. I think it was built in me, really. And I think when I saw the local village hall that was burnt to the ground accidentally by a good friend of mine in the local village that I grew up in, when I saw the new trench footings being dug for that at the age of 3 or 4, I think that got me going. I think really, and obviously that and the buzz of the satisfaction of what we do as well. So
your career has been planned from very young.
Pretty much from the age of 3 or 4, I'd say, and yeah, always drawing, always sort of looking at technical things, mostly taking things apart and getting into trouble for not being able to put them back together, and yeah, just rolling on from there basically.
Yeah. And Nick?
Well, I originally trained as a graphic designer, and my background was always going to be design. That was all I was interested in. I was drawing, I was making things, I was building things as a child, so I should really probably have been an architect. But when I went to inquire about it, the training seemed a little bit too long, and being a lazy one, I decided to do a graphic design course, and then later on retrained as an interior designer, because I found that every job I had, and I was working with some very large ad agencies, I ended up having to redesign all the offices because we were moving so much, and the last one being the entire 4th floor of Greater London House. So then I decided that interior design was more exciting than graphic design, but still very much part of what I do.
And is it true that there's certainly the feeling that it's true that architects and designers are put against each other, and is this an experience you've had that?
I think the two are separated too much, in all honesty, from a client's perspective.
Yeah.
I think there's a huge amount of abortive spend and work and time that could be removed from the process of having designers and architects, and so in a sense they're too separated in my experience.
Yeah.
I mean, we're asked to do both design and architecture.
Yeah.
And the synergies of when we can do both in one building in terms of designing the building and interiors at the same time, it transforms what can be achieved in the time. So they are too separated, I think.
Yes, yeah, they are. And I'm often called in on a project, and one of the first questions from the client is, do I need the architect first, or do I get you in first? And the question then is, well, what do you want to do? And invariably, as an interior designer, if I'm called in first, I look at it from an architectural perspective, but not being an architect, if that's then required, then that side of it is brought in and we work together on it. But there should be no hard and fast rule that you get one in before the other. You have to look at the project and decide what is most important. You don't need an architect if you're just taking a few walls down. If you're completely remodelling, then yes, you do need an architect, and the architect and the designer can very much work together to make that work for the client. They shouldn't be separate, they should be part and parcel.
So the ultimate thing is communication with the client and within the design group or the design team.
Yeah.
And funny, we were talking about one of the things I've noted down is titles, because there's a lot of discussion about architect, designer, and never the twain shall meet, and they're always at loggerheads. But in fact, not necessarily, and certainly on the projects that I've been on, the whole team works together. It isn't something you can actually point at and say, well, that was my bit. It was everyone's bit, and it's inclusive.
Yeah.
But communication from the very word go has to be a key element.
I think it's the communication, but it's also the listening as well as of other parts of the team, and mainly the client. I mean, it's quite astonishing sometimes how clients spend an awful amount of money on professional fees, but then they kind of sometimes don't listen entirely to really good advice, and that's their prerogative, and there's other reasons for that. But I mean, the ethos we have within our teams is that the person least interested in design will be the person that we will kind of help and sort of motivate and educate about what we're trying to do, and you apply that to sort of, you know, the person that's least interested in costs, that person then and it's amazing how when you're sat around a table with a couple of beers or something like that at the beginning of the project, before again anything's been drawn, because it's important that this happens before anything is drawn, that it's amazing how much sort of motivation and sort of thoughts come out of the woodwork from the quantity surveyor who's thinking suddenly about design. And it's that team essence which is what drives these things
and it
forward.
brings value too, because the most unlikely
Masses of
people
value.
bring in an answer to a thing that, you know, the specialist in that area have missed, and it's that kind of thing that's, I think, really enriching.
Communication is very important right from the start. It irons out most of the problems quite early on, and some of the ideas that each of us can have may or may not work, and something that we want to do, somebody else might have a twist on that which makes it even better. So why try and do that halfway through the project when you suddenly think that's not quite working, and then somebody said, yeah, I thought about that, you know, at the last meeting, but too frightened to say it. You've got to communicate and get everything on the table. It makes things cheaper and quicker, and so much more easygoing with the clients and all the suppliers working with you.
So of your chosen careers now, you're well established and enjoying the fruits of your labour, as it were. What, if you were given a magic wand, what would you say, right, I'd love to cut this bit out of my day-to-day job or my projects, or there's one element that is something that's unpleasant and you'd like to remove, if you could, what would it be?
The client.
Well, that's interesting, because I was going to say the client's politics.
Yeah, well, you explained it a little bit better than that. Yes, I am being flippant there. Because I do my own property development, therefore I'm my own client, everything runs so much smoother that way. A client is always going to be changing their minds, and that's the stumbling block that you find all the way along. The teasing, the tweaking, the changing, the slowing things down, I forgot about this part of it, this is what I want now, and that is the issue. But if I really wanted to take something out of the equation that would make things certainly run smoother for us, it's probably planners.
Which is interesting, because that was my second answer.
He was supposed to be following you.
No,
We're communicating.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I think, I would try and remove the frustration from the process, and I think there's a frustration that comes on from a number of areas, and we constantly see abortive time that doesn't necessarily have to be wasted. We see sort of slow planning processes, which is a major headache, as we all know, and that could be sharpened right up. I mean, it's a very slow point that actually misses the point a lot of the time at the same time, and that's hugely frustrating.
And what about working outside your comfort zone? I mean, you're predominantly residential in terms of development and design, and you're predominantly commercial with some residential kind of leanings, and that's how we kind of become. We start becoming a kind of specialised in that kind of area, and I found, and I've done a few different things, different projects out of the UK, in the Far East, and out of my comfort zone, from an interior of a car to something that I've had to really rethink everything, but take my general kind of design knowledge with me. How do you feel about that? Is that I can see that being a threat to car designers, or to why shouldn't you design a rug, or why shouldn't you design a telephone? Or
I think it has to blur. I think we've got to be able to move into other areas. I certainly wouldn't specialise in furniture design, but there are projects where I do design individual pieces and have them made because that's what the project demands. I'd be quite happy to do a car design, but I wouldn't want to do that all the time. I'd like to do hotel rooms, but not an entire hotel. Individual boutique rooms, yes. I'd like to blend into different areas, but I would still want to focus on, my pure residential interior design. That's what I enjoy doing. But I'd like to make it a little bit more exciting from time to time. And I do by bringing in lots of different things. I involve myself in the architecture of a building, but I get my architect to draw up the plans and tell me whether it's possible or not, rather than I sit down and draw it up, and I can do that up to a point, but I wouldn't want to go down that route either. But I think we can all blend in and focus on areas to add a little bit more excitement to the job that we do.
Well, I
it
think
can get very dull if we're just doing the same thing.
I think you've got to move around a minute, because the clients get more out of that, and as a designer, or whether you're the client, if you've got a designer that's cross-fertilising experiences from different sectors, and sectors is a very sort of like process word for it, but different facets of life can introduce very interesting ideas for offices and all sorts of other things. And we've just finished a design for a sexual health clinic in Soho, which is a new thing for us. We've not really done much for the NHS, but the NHS wanted some new thinking, some fresh ideas, and some fresh eyes on the world of health. And so we've got a compliant, hygienic scheme which doesn't look anything like a hospital. It's got better value, it's got more excitement for the end user, certainly generating more excitement for the NHS and so forth. So it's good for everyone to move around,
you have a
the
fresh
pass
eye.
a little bit.
Yeah, you have a fresh eye on the project. You're looking at it from a totally different perspective, and that's what creates the freshness in it. A hospital designer who only specialises in hospitals will almost prefab that across the country, whereas if we come in and do something like that we haven't done before, it will be totally different.
Yeah, and I certainly see designs that have been just approached in exactly the same way, and you can feel it's the same.
There's
which is
way too much design writing in each sector, and it's wrong to have sectors, really.
Yes,
right?
yeah. It restricts it.
But equally on the other hand, there's a demand from the profession itself, and to a certain extent the public, to have more legislation in place, to have more training in place, to have more kind of safety catches in place in many ways, and I'm part of that kind of belief that really, would you really put probably in residential terms, your most valuable asset in the hands of someone who has a good eye?
Yeah. There is a lot of risk involved in that on who they're choosing. They have to choose the people who have a good reputation, who have the support behind them, that have the experience, the reputation, that have the knowledge. And there are a lot of people out there that just drift into it, and you don't know what you're getting involved in. It's the same with builders. You have to be very careful who you take on with a builder. They get a lot of bad publicity because when they mess up bad. A building can fall down. So you do have to be careful, and regulating the industry up to a point, I think, is very, very good, but not to the point where somebody is so good at what they do, but not very good perhaps at sort of meeting those regulations because of timing, because of an inability perhaps to focus when it comes to exams and building up their reputation. So
we've got to have safety. We've got to have safety.
The safety levels that you have to reach, I think.
But if they're too constrained, and in our society we're lent towards constraining. Yes. We're lent towards let's put another camera up type of approach. That will kill off the creativity that we actually are very fortunate to have.
Yeah.
So it is a balance, I think.
It is. I mean, it's like Europe banning bananas of a certain shape because they're not known to look like a proper banana. The banana tastes exactly the same. It's thrown away, discarded, but that banana could feed somebody. and give them a great deal of pleasure. It's the same with a designer. They,
Yeah.
they may not have enough CPD points. Do you throw them out the organisation because they haven't got 25 certificates for that year because they were too busy? They were too busy because they were so good at their job.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to the last question because we're running short of time. Just a quick one, really, to think about is in terms of what do you think our greatest challenge as professionals is on its way? Is it climate change? Is it technology? Is it any of those things or something else? What do you see as the key challenge as an architect and designer?
I think it's keeping up with technology. Because homes are becoming smart homes at every level now. Even the simplest thing, people just want lights to come on and off when they walk into a room. One switch deals with everything, working everything from your iPhone. It's keeping up with that technology, but also then looking at the environment to make it cost effective and not creating this sort of huge glut of mountains of stuff that's being chucked out. Green issues have to be included in projects at some level. Technology has to make that home livable, more up to date. The way things are going in the world at the moment, you've got to keep up with it. Otherwise, you're going to start slipping back. So technology for me is something I've got to keep ahead of all the time because it's
future-proofing, really.
It is future-proofing, and even if a client doesn't want LED lighting or home automation, if we're doing a project that allows for rewiring, we wire it anyway.
Yeah.
It costs a few pound more technically, but it's there for when they decide they want to do it, because a few years down the line they will, and that's what you want to feed in.
In the commercial world, it's technology, but in a very different slant. We're advising organisations at the moment about their futurology of, say, 5 years' time and 10 years' time. And the big challenge at the moment is that there needs to be a huge leap of faith by organisations at this moment in time, because the equipment that we're using to work these days in terms of the technology with the iPads, and I mean the time of the tablet is here already, and they're usable in anger, but there's this shift that needs to happen from the desktop computer to working in a lovely sofa, with an iPad on your lap, and for a business to make that transition, because that transition has an enormous impact on the physical nature of what offices will be. So it's that transition now which is the biggest challenge, and we're seeing organisations spending a lot of money on their fit outs and their new environments now, but they're not taking the futurology far enough, and they'll be re-spending that money in 2.5 years' time. Yeah. That's the biggest gridlock for people at the minute in the commercial world.
And there's a huge waste then of everything being thrown out. So these mountains are building up, and you've just got to plan ahead. And that's what we do in our homes. We plan ahead for them, we advise them, and ultimately as you're halfway through the project they decide they want it anyway, so it's already in, and that's what we've got to do. We've got to be ahead of the game all the time.
Nick, thank you very much. Lee, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
You're welcome.